Right, so we're going to have a look here at this chapter here, which is viruses. Now, viruses, we are all so much more familiar with viruses today because society has been shut down, of course, with the COVID-19 strain of a virus. Um, this chapter here involves looking at these groups of organisms and trying to understand a few things about their structure and how they invade the human body and affect us. Now, it's important to mention here that all viruses are viruses, or all viruses rather are parasites. So that means that they are disease causing. Um, Now, there's many viruses out there, of course, but only some will affect humans. Okay, and you probably have a fair idea about some of these already. So, for example, we get um, uh, humans can get measles or mumps. They can get things like chickenpox or the flu, and all of these infections are caused by viruses. Now, this viruses are organisms that it's debated with whether they're actually an organism or not. And we'll be looking at this shortly, but um, it's because viruses they don't fit neatly into any of the other kingdoms of life. So the other kingdoms of life, there are plants, there are animals, there are bacteria, there are fungi, for example, mushrooms, and there's another group of organisms we'll look at later, but viruses don't fit in neatly to any of them. And the reason that they don't fit in neatly is because technically they don't meet many of those characteristics of living things that we would have described at the start of the year. So if you think about this, the things that we would have covered at the start of the year, things like organization. So all organisms are organized, we say, and that means that they start off with cells, and then cells work together to create tissues, and tissues create more complexity with organs, and then you build up to the organ system. Well, viruses themselves, they're actually smaller than a cell. They don't have a cell membrane that surrounds them. So this virus here is actually much smaller than a cell and doesn't undergo the processes a cell normally would. Like, for example, respiration, where a cell produces energy for the organism. Well, viruses don't undergo respiration. So there's a many reasons. We will look at this in more detail at a later stage, but just know for now that viruses, many scientists debate that these things are not living. Okay, so viruses, you'll see many images of them. Um, Viruses, really, what are they? The viruses are they are um, organisms that contain DNA or RNA, okay, enclosed in a structure here we call a capsid, and that's really what a virus is. It is some DNA, a loop of DNA. Or RNA that has been enclosed in some sort of a membrane to protect it that can invade a cell. Now, there are other parts that we won't necessarily look at that are used here to help a virus to invade a cell, but they're very very simple organisms really. um like and you can see here why there's an argument that they're not living, because all they are really is just DNA or something called ribonucleic acid, RNA, which is just a molecule really that is surrounded by some sort of a membrane. Now, um, we know that these guys here, in order for viruses to live, viruses have to invade other cells. um, so they use the cell to replicate. And when you think of replication, you should think of cloning, because this is exactly what viruses do. They clone themselves um, using cells. So one virus will go in, and what will come out then will be millions and millions of viruses, clones of that virus, ready to infect other cells. Now, for movement, these viruses often rely on other organisms to move them. So They could be passed into the body in a few different ways. They could be just floating in the air around us, okay, and we just inhale it. Um, Viruses could we could come in contact with it through fluid. So when people are sneezing in the current pandemic, obviously that material that could contain COVID in the liquid, and that would be problematic. So viruses often rely on the physical environment to move them around, or sometimes even animals can carry viruses and transmit it to people. Now viruses. As we said, they're sort of weird, really, in the kingdoms of life because they don't really fit any of the kingdoms. They don't need nutrients, so they don't actually feed. They don't undergo respiration, which is really bizarre when you think about it. Because when you think, the first thing you think about when you think of living organisms, you think, okay, they need food. They need food for energy, but viruses don't need that. Um, and they actually don't produce like wastes themselves without actually being inside the host's cell. So viruses will are parasites, and that means that they invade other cells. Now, I have notes on all of this, and you can take down the simplified drawings of a virus. But kind of questions that come up on this section here are they're quite straightforward, really, in terms of the virus. Like this one here in 2013 said, Why do you think a virus is described as a piece of genetic material that has escaped from a cell?" And the answer for that is because really all a virus is it is a piece of DNA, so deoxyribonucleic acid or ribonucleic acid, surrounded here by a cell membrane, a membrane here we call the capsid. Okay, and that's the evidence. You could also use other evidence to say, look, they don't have a cell itself; they're smaller than a cell, and they don't undergo the I suppose the processes of a normal organism. So, what exactly happens when a virus is trying to get into your body, and how does your immune system respond to that? Well, in your in your body, you have an immune system ready to try to attack any foreign substances that come into your body, and a virus would be exactly that. A virus can get into your body in three different ways. It can get in through inhaling, so when you inhale through your mouth or through your nose, that can enter your body then, and the virus can try to find the route to get into your blood. A virus can also get into your body when you eat. So, if you are touching a surface and you happen to have um, the virus left on food, you take it into your digestive system and it can go into your body that way. And the third way it can get into your body and would be like if you have a cut and it enters into your cut. Um, like the virus, as we know, lives in the environment around us, in the air around us, um, and especially if you have a person who's sick, they're spreading a lot of that virus around the place in the air around you. So you just have to protect yourself, obviously these days with a mask. So when the virus enters the body, what is its goal? Its goal really is to reach into the body to find a host cell. So in our body, we have about 100 trillion cells. It's a ridiculous number of cells. And viruses are adapted to attack certain types of cells in our body. So right now, COVID is adapted to attack our lungs, the cells in our lungs. So what it's trying to do is it's trying to get the cell in our lungs. And what it does is when it reaches the cell, it is going to attach to the cell itself. So on the outside here, this green part here represents the virus. This virus will attach to a protein on the outside of the cell. And this is very specific. A virus can, we say that there's such thing as virus specificity, just like an enzyme and a substrate are specific to each other. A virus can only attach to a certain part of this cell. And that part of the cell, you probably have heard of this word before. It's called an antigen. Okay, an antigen is a protein that's found on the outside of a cell. And what you may have heard of that as before is where we talked about the different types of blood types. So you have a antigen on the outside. You might have type B antigen on the outside. You might have type AB blood, AB antigens on the outside of your cells. So an antigen is a protein found on the outside of a cell, and a virus is specific to that antigen. In other words, once it attaches to that antigen, it can get into the cell. Once it attaches to the antigen, it's now trying to burrow into your cell. And um, it's using different chemicals to break into your cell. But once it pierces a hole in that cell, it's going to release what we say the nucleic acid into that cell. The nucleic acid is DNA or RNA. So you're probably wondering at this stage, what is RNA? Well, we will be talking about it soon, but it's basically a simplified version of DNA. DNA has got this double helix shape. You all know what DNA looks like. RNA is basically the same thing, only it's one strand. Okay? Um, so this nucleic acid gets into the cell, and the DNA and RNA is working its way towards the nucleus of the cell. So, like for example, now if we're talking about COVID-19, the virus now has attached to the antigen of the lung cell. It has burrowed into the lung cell, and what it's doing there is um, it's going the DNA or the RNA is working its way towards the nucleus, and it's trying to take over the nucleus of the cell in the lung. Okay, once it takes over the nucleus, what it can do is it can use the nucleus for replication. So replication, remember, is like cloning. So you're cloning the DNA or RNA of the virus, and it totally deactivates the cell. So the cell is not working anymore. Now, our immune system at this time, you're probably wondering what's going on with our immune system. Well, it may be that our immune system has not recognized that there's a problem or a threat in our body at the moment. We have cells that are going around and they're almost like scouts in our body trying to find out if there's an infection in our body. But it takes time, and it may not have recognized that this has attacked our lungs. So, in the meantime, the virus is going to replicate as much as possible and make millions of viruses. The cell has totally been deactivated. We're no longer in that cell. We're no longer making our own DNA, and the cell effectively is going to die. Okay, this cell it has shortened its lifespan, and it actually speeds up its death. And in the process of its death, the cell is going to burst. And the moment it bursts, it is the moment it releases viruses all around it into the surrounding cells and tissues. So, how does our body defend against this? Well, we'll be looking at this in the immune system. We have something called antibodies, and we also have white blood cells here that come and they physically destroy these cells, but that is for a later day. So what I want you to know about is, how does a virus actually enter the cell? Now, I skipped over a video there earlier, and I will show you this video on Google Classroom. You can look at it in your own time. It's very interesting. But the types of viruses that we have encountered in the past, viruses are very dangerous, more dangerous in fact than many bacteria, because our body's only way to defend against these viruses is if we develop antibodies. And to do that, often what we have to do is either get exposed to the disease and survive it, or maybe get the body to be infected with, not infected, but rather give the body a vaccine, so the vaccine can help the body make its own defenses. So there's different types of viruses out there that target different types of organisms. So COVID-19 is something that affects humans. Mumps, measles, rubella affect humans. HIV is another virus that affects humans. But there are viruses that are specific to other animals and plants. So, for example, rabies affects canines, like, for example, dogs or wolves. Okay, I'm sure you've all heard of rabid dogs. There's other viruses that affect plants, and I'm sure you've seen this discoloration in nature. Um, this is what we call a mosaic disease. A mosaic disease affects things like tomato plants, um, and tobacco plants. And there's also, like, you would think that bacteria would be immune to viruses, but actually, bacteria can be attacked by viruses as well. So there's no animal or organism of the different kingdoms that are immune to viruses. Viruses attack many different types of organisms, right? So I'm going to keep try to keep things short over the next few weeks. I'm going to stop here. We've learned enough about viruses at the time being, but I want you to think about 5 different key points you've learned about viruses. Put it in your rough work copy, write it down, and then check in with the notes to see how you got on with that.